There was a man who lived and breathed for the thrill of adventure. He was a force of nature, a gladiator of the mountains, and a true embodiment of the human spirit's unbreakable will. With his eyes set on the highest peak on earth, Marco pushed his limits to the brink of sanity, defying death with every breath and leaving behind a legacy that would forever echo in the hearts of those who dared to dream. But the end was devastating. It broke many hearts and silenced all the cheers. This is the story of a man who was lost on Mount Everest. Stay tuned till the end to witness this amazing journey of Marco Siffredi. With that said, let's start. Every single year, there are countless brave souls who make it their ultimate mission to climb the tallest peak on our planet, Mount Everest. And while simply reaching the summit is a jaw-dropping accomplishment in and of itself, for some, it just isn't enough. They want to push the limits even further by climbing without oxygen masks, taking incredibly dangerous routes, or even going without a guide altogether. But no matter what kind of death-defying feat they must undertake, there's one thing that connects them all: their unwavering determination to ascend and descend on foot. I mean, can you even imagine it? The wind whipping past your face as you scale even higher, the air growing thinner and thinner with each passing moment, your body struggling to keep up with the constant demands placed upon it. It takes a special kind of person to even consider attempting something like this, let alone actually going through with it. And yet, every year, we see more and more people taking on this incredible challenge, facing their fears head-on and proving to themselves that they are capable of achieving anything they set their minds to. It's a testament to the incredible power of the human spirit, and it reminds us all that we are capable of so much more than we ever thought possible. But there was one man who completely shattered the traditional view of mountaineering, changing the game forever. On September 8, 2002, Marco Siffredi, a 23-year-old mountaineer and snowboarder hailing from Chamonix, France, achieved the seemingly impossible by reaching the top of Everest. And at that moment, he took a well-deserved pause to soak up the incredible sensation of standing atop the entire world. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the incredible feats of all the other mountaineers who have ever tackled Everest. They are all heroes in their own right, and they deserve all the praise in the world for their unbelievable accomplishments. But there was something different about Marco, something that set him apart from all the others. Maybe it was his youth, his fearlessness, or his sheer determination to succeed against all odds. Maybe it was the fact that he was a snowboarder rather than a traditional mountaineer, bringing a fresh perspective to the sport. Or maybe it was just something about his spirit, something that spoke to all of us on a level that we couldn't quite understand. Let me tell you about Marco Siffredi. This guy was an absolute legend. Born on May 22, 1979, he grew up in the picturesque town of Chamonix, nestled right in the heart of the French Alps. And let me tell you, this place was no joke. The mountains around Chamonix were known for their extreme terrain, and they had a reputation for being a breeding ground for some seriously hardcore skiing and snowboarding. But Marco wasn't deterred by the danger. In fact, he was drawn to it. From a young age, he fell in love with skiing and snowboarding, and he quickly became known around town for his insane feats of daring. Local heroes like Jean-Marc Boivin, who was famous for his death-defying skiing stunts, served as inspiration for Marco as he took on the valley's most challenging slopes. And let me tell you, this guy was no slouch. In 1996, when he was just 17 years old, he decided to take on the north face of the Aiguille du Midi in the Mont Blanc area. Now, if you know anything about skiing or snowboarding, you'll know that his descent was absolutely insane. Some people thought he was flat out crazy for even attempting it. But Marco didn't care. He woke up one morning, grabbed his snowboard, and made his way to the mountains. It took him 7 grueling hours to reach the summit, but once he got there, he wasted no time. He strapped on his board and began his daring descent, completing the entire trial without unstrapping his board even once. And you know what? He finished it according to the rules, which qualified it as a legitimate performance. What a freaking legend! And that was just the beginning. Just a year later, when he was still just a teenager, Marco successfully descended the Mallory route on the north face of the Aiguille du Midi. This route was no joke. We're talking about 1,100 meters of steep, rocky passages with gradients of around 55 degrees. And Marco did it all without batting an eye. News of his incredible feats spread like wildfire around town, and people started calling him all sorts of names: fearless, insane, stupid, you name it. But Marco didn't care. He was just doing what he loved, pushing the limits of what was possible and inspiring others to do the same. And even though he's no longer with us, his legacy lives on, inspiring generations of skiers and snowboarders to chase their dreams and conquer their fears. Marco was a force to be reckoned with in the world of extreme skiing and snowboarding. He was constantly pushing himself to new limits, and his list of accomplishments grew longer with each passing year. But for Marco, it was never enough. He had his sights set on the ultimate prize, Mount Everest. At first, Marco's father was hesitant to support his son's ambitious goal. But when he realized there was no stopping Marco, he reached out to Russell Bryce, a fellow mountaineer and owner of the company that organized Everest expeditions. Russell saw something special in Marco, and after a few conversations, he agreed to help him achieve his dream. For the next few years, Marco worked tirelessly at his family's campsite, saving up the money he would need to fund his Everest expedition. But even during this time, Marco was a hero in his community. He had already conquered all the summits in the area, and people looked up to him as a symbol of courage and determination. Finally, in June 1999, Marco was ready to begin his quest for Everest. It would be a grueling journey, with 8 other dizzying mountains to conquer along the way. But Marco was determined, and nothing would stand in his way. When I first read about Marco Siffredi's accomplishments, I was absolutely blown away. The idea of snowboarding down a route that had only been done once before, by an absolute legend like Jean-Marc Boivin, no less, is just mind-boggling to me. And the fact that Marco was able to not only do it, but do it with such skill and grace that he earned a reputation as one of the world's best extreme skiers and snowboarders is truly awe-inspiring. But what really gets me about Marco's story is his unwavering dedication and commitment to his craft. The fact that he carried a small cross with him on every expedition as a talisman, given to him by a friend's mother, is such a beautiful and powerful symbol of his respect for the mountains and the risks involved in these kinds of extreme sports. It shows that he understood the gravity of what he was doing and that he took nothing for granted. And then, there's his ambition. Successfully descending Doria Labka at almost 30,000 feet and Mount Cho Oyo at around 27,000 feet? That's just incredible. I can't even imagine the kind of courage and determination it takes to even contemplate something like that, let alone actually do it. It's a testament to Marco's strength of character and his willingness to push himself to the limits of what is possible. But what I find most inspiring about Marco is his willingness to dream big and take risks. Standing at the summit of Mount Cho Oyu and looking out at the world's highest peak, Mount Everest, he knew that he was ready for his biggest challenge yet. That kind of ambition is what drives people to achieve. I can't even imagine the thrill and excitement Marco must have felt when he first laid eyes on the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. Standing there, looking out at that incredible view must have ignited something deep within him, planting the seeds for a truly ambitious and groundbreaking project. I can only imagine the incredible amount of determination and hard work that Marco must have put in to make his dream a reality. It takes an incredible amount of courage and skill to attempt to snowboard down from the summit of Mount Everest, and Marco must have been absolutely fearless to even contemplate such a feat. As I read through this incredible story, my heart was in my throat. The sheer bravery and athleticism required to pull off such a feat is truly awe-inspiring. And even though Marco's original plan was thwarted by the lack of snow, he was undeterred, switching routes and pushing himself to the limit to achieve his goal. I can only imagine the sense of accomplishment and triumph that Marco must have felt when he finally made it down the mountain. To be the first person to snowboard down from the summit of Mount Everest is an incredible achievement and one that will go down in history. Marco's incredible achievement of becoming the first person to snowboard down from the summit of Mount Everest was truly a momentous occasion. I can only imagine the sense of pride and accomplishment that he must have felt when he made that uninterrupted trek of about 30,000 meters on slopes of 40 to 45 degrees. At just 22 years old, he had accomplished something that most people can only dream of. But despite all the acclaim and recognition he received for his feat, Marco was not content to rest on his laurels. He knew that he had deviated from his original plan when he chose to descend from Norton. and he was determined to do the descent again, this time via the Hornbein Couloir. This route was even more dangerous and unpredictable, but the mountain had captured his imagination and he was determined to try again. The logistics and finances of such an endeavor were a constant source of frustration, but Marco was undeterred. He knew that the timing had to be perfect and that the couloir had to be covered with just the right amount of snow to facilitate the descent. Despite setbacks and the constant threat of fatal failure, he pressed on, driven by his unshakable determination. And even though he forgot to bring his lucky pendant with the cross, Marco arrived in Kathmandu and met 3 Sherpas who would play a crucial role in helping him reach the summit of the mountain. These brave and skilled men would prove to be Marco's allies on his second attempt to snowboard down from the summit of Mount Everest, and their courage and determination would be an inspiration to him as he faced the challenge ahead. The journey to Mount Everest was no easy feat, but Marco was willing to take on any challenge that came his way. He knew that the road ahead would be tough, but he never lost sight of his goal to snowboard down the Hornbein Couloir. As they climbed higher and higher, Marco struggled with headaches and altitude sickness. It must have been incredibly frustrating for him, but he never let it get him down. Instead, he remained determined to push through and make it to the top of the mountain. And when they finally reached high camp, it was an emotional moment for Marco. All his hard work had paid off, and he was one step closer to achieving his dream. The sense of accomplishment he felt was indescribable. But Marco knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The descent down the Hornbein Couloir was known to be dangerous and unpredictable. It would require all of his skill and expertise to make it down safely. But he was willing to take the risk. His passion for the mountain and his sport drove him forward, and he was determined to make history once again. As he prepared for the descent, Marco must have felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He knew that anything could happen on the mountain, and the stakes were high. But he was ready for the challenge. Donned his talisman and took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the task at hand. And when he finally made it down the Hornbein Couloir, it was an incredible moment. The rush of adrenaline, the wind in his hair, and the sheer thrill of the ride made it all worth it. Marco had achieved something truly remarkable, something that no one had ever done before. It was a moment that he could remember for the rest of his life. The conditions on the mountain were unforgiving, constantly throwing obstacles in Marco's path as he and his team tried to ascend. Avalanches and melting ice kept foiling their plans, and they were forced to wait for a window of clear weather. When the news finally broke of a clear forecast on September 8th, Marco was over the moon with excitement. He knew that this was his best chance at reaching the summit of Mount Everest. Despite the challenges he had already faced on the mountain, Marco felt strong and confident as he and his team began the climb. He was determined to reach the summit, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. However, as he spoke with his friend Jan on the phone, he mentioned adieu, a word typically reserved for when someone expects to never see the other person again. Jan was concerned, but Marco brushed it off and continued with their plans. As they climbed higher and higher, the satellite phone batteries ran out, leaving Marco and his team completely isolated from the rest of the world. They were vulnerable to whatever challenges came their way, but they pressed on. Finally, after a grueling 12.5-hour climb in the death zone, they reached the summit of Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth. The feeling of accomplishment and elation was unparalleled. Marco and his team were exhausted, but they couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride and joy at having achieved such a feat. Despite all the setbacks, all obstacles, they persevered and reached the summit. It was a moment that would stay with Marco for the rest of his life, a moment of triumph that would forever be etched in his memory. The rush of excitement Marco felt as he finally reached the summit of Mount Everest was overwhelming. But for him, it was just another step in achieving his ultimate goal of completing the mountain's first uninterrupted snowboard run. The Sherpas warned him of the storm coming and urged him not to go. But he was determined. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, and he wasn't going to back down now. With 3,000 meters of pristine snow waiting for him on the Hornbein Couloir, Marco strapped on his snowboard and refilled his oxygen tank. Despite the rising clouds and the worries of his companions, he was ready to make his dream come true. He took a deep breath and pushed off, carving down the mountain with ease. As he disappeared from sight, the Sherpas watched in awe. They were the last to see him alive along the slope of the Hornbein Khol Wa. But when they reached the spot where they saw a mysterious figure gliding down the mountain, they found no sign of Marco or his snowboard tracks. It was a devastating moment of realization that he must have died. The news of Marco's disappearance was devastating. People had been eagerly waiting for him to return, but there was no sign of him. Everyone was talking about it, wondering what could have happened. When Olivia Besson left base camp, he knew deep down that Marco was gone. Surviving a night on Everest is almost impossible, and with each passing day, hope dwindled. Russell Bryce, upon learning of Marco's disappearance, immediately went searching for him. He scoured the mountain for weeks, but still, no trace of Marco or his snowboard was found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. A month after his disappearance, a memorial was held for Marco. His family, girlfriend Stephanie, and close friends attended. They were all heartbroken and grieving for the loss of a young man with so much potential. Despite the initial trails he left as he descended from the summit, Marco's body was never found, and there was never any other clue to his whereabouts. It was a tragedy that left many people shaken and a stark reminder of the dangers of climbing the world's highest peak. The story of Marco's disappearance on Mount Everest shook the world. People were left wondering how such a talented and passionate young man could be taken so suddenly and cruelly. The news of his disappearance spread quickly, and soon it seemed like everyone was talking about it. At first, there was hope that he had just gotten lost or was stranded somewhere on the mountain. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, that hope began to fade. The reality of his death set in, and it was a devastating blow to his family, friends, and fans. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for his loved ones, waiting and hoping for news that would never come. The fact that Marco's body was never found only added to the pain and uncertainty. They were left to grieve without closure, without being able to properly say goodbye. For the climbing community, Marco's death was a harsh reminder of the dangers and risks that come with scaling the highest peaks in the world. It's a reminder that even the most experienced climbers can fall victim to the unforgiving and unpredictable conditions of the mountain. But despite the tragedy, Marco's legacy lives on. He will always be remembered as a passionate and talented snowboarder who dared to dream big and pursue his goals with determination and courage. He was an inspiration to many, and his love for the mountains will continue to inspire others to chase their own dreams and passions, while always being mindful of the risks involved. And this brings us to the end of the video. We hope that you found our videos informative and thought-provoking. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from us. And remember, disasters can happen to anyone, but by coming together and sharing knowledge, we can build a safer and more resilient future. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.